Hello, everyone. I'm recording a quick walkthrough video for this one anothering tool that I've created. I figured it might need some context in order to help all of you be able to use it well. And so I'm including a short, I'm going to try and keep this to like 10 or 12 minutes, but just to give you a little bit of context about why I put this together, why it's shaped the way it is, and how we're using it in our churches here. Um, just a brief bit of context. So about 4 years ago, we switched from meeting as a traditional church in a building on a Sunday morning to took that group of people and divided it into three smaller groups. And each one of those meets in a home on Sunday afternoons around a meal, and then a conversation after the meal. And part of the reason we did that was because we realized that we were really not being a family together when we were meeting the other way. And it was becoming a hindrance to us actually being a family because everyone sort of felt like coming on to a Sunday worship service and hugging each other and listening to a sermon and singing some songs with the praise team, that's what it meant to follow Christ, and that's what it meant to be a family. And yet people were still very kind of siloed and isolated in their own situations, and dealing with life on their own. And so, in an effort to make an adjustment to actually be a family together, live as family, we broke that into smaller groups that each meet. We still get together once a month as a cluster, all three of our groups. But on a week-to-week basis, they meet in homes with a meal and then a conversation. And it's really begun to be transformative for us. It did take a couple of years to kind of deconstruct some of the expectations that we all had of what Sunday was going to look like. But we began to bear fruit in it, I think, probably over the last year and a half. And we've had other church networks that are doing similar things to us that are in kind of a larger network of churches across North America that I've invited into our situation and have interacted with us, and we've interacted with them, and it's a way of kind of strengthening one another. And so as we began meeting this way, the conversation began to shift rather than one person being a teacher. We had a leader in place, but the conversation was shaped around everyone's life and understanding of the New Testament teaching, the apostles' teaching, and beginning to really shape their lives around it and bumping up against difficulties and things that we all needed help with figuring out. So, in order to really shape our lives as kind of extended family networks, really, we all talk about being a family together. It's part of the language that I've experienced my entire life growing up in traditional churches, but there was never really the context to actually live as family together. And so we made that shift. And I would say in like the last 18 months, we've really, really seen significant habits begin to take shape, priorities begin to change, and progress being made in really living together as extended family networks. And part of the conversation around that to help strengthen us was to look at what was going in the New Testament. We understand the New Testament, all the documents in the New Testament were written for the purpose of establishing and strengthening churches. That's how we see the New Testament. And so this document is arranged around the different networks that were there, that existed in the first century, that the apostles were shaping and speaking into to strengthen churches in particular networks. Now we have Paul central here. We have Paul's network because we understand from Ephesians 3:8 to 11 that Paul was given a unique role. Jesus actually broke back through the heavenly veil into earth again to pluck Paul out of his situation because he had a unique calling for Paul, a unique stewardship of revealing Jesus' grand strategy and implementing that among the churches. And you see that happening over the course of the first century. By the late 60s, you've got an entire network of churches across the Roman Empire, and Paul's continuing to move that. But you also have Peter and John addressing other smaller networks within that larger movement. Peter specifically addressing diaspora churches, during that time, Jewish diaspora churches that were stuck in old traditions. They were stuck in their old religious traditions and were facing pressure from all sides, from their old religious community to come back into Judaism, and also from the culture and government. The Jewish people were seen as troublemakers, and so they had pressure from both sides. So Peter and his team are addressing these churches to strengthen them and help them to remain strong and develop complex states of mind, complex ways of understanding their life in this new paradigm that Jesus had introduced. So that's what Peter's doing. Paul was laying in the framework, the whole framework for the apostolic teaching and the traditioning process for all the churches, revealing Christ's grand strategy. And then John is addressing, actually, after, toward the end of the first century there, he's actually addressing one of Paul's networks, the Ephesus and network there in Asia, the churches that were around that hub church of Ephesus. And he's addressing the small regional network, preparing them to love one another well by abiding in the apostles' teaching so that they can live the abundant life in the face of the coming ordeals and the global battles that are coming, so that the world may believe. So you've got these three things: Paul being central, revealing the grand strategy, and then Peter dealing with this diaspora network, and John with this small Asian network. So it gives us kind of patterns or prototypes that we can look at for shaping our churches today. So these one another's are actually taken from a book that I think is from the 80s, Carl George's Prepare Your Church for the Future. And so I took a list that's in that book of 59 one another's from the New Testament. Now, George really what he does is he takes everywhere there's the English words, one another or each other. And so he found 59 of those across the New Testament. Now, I think there's probably well more than 59 directions for how to one another. But I took those 59 and I reshaped them around this understanding of the New Testament with Paul as central, revealing the grand strategy and the traditioning process for the churches, and then Peter's network and John's network so that we can understand the context for these one another's. Rather than just kind of a general one anothering, there's a very specific one anothering around churches that are living as charismatic communities or little families of families, but are also part of larger networks around a hub church, so that no individual church is doing this all on their own. They're strengthened by these networks. And then there was a large network all across the Roman Empire. But all of those have to be addressed at every level. So you see different types of apostolic type leaders, Peter, Paul, and John, working in different networks and shaping this. So when you come to think about one anothering in light of that, it changes the whole dynamic of really understanding what these one another's are calling us to do, and how they're shaping us as families of families, to be missional communities in our cities, in our neighborhoods, and together across North America and even around the globe. There's a larger network of churches doing these sorts of things around the globe right now as well. So I wanted to give you that context for understanding this chart. When you look at this, I've laid it out in that way. So you can look at Paul's role in network development as the central piece here. And the 59 one another's that Carl George had, those were only found in Paul's early letters and middle letters. He didn't have any of those from the later letters that were directed to Paul's key leaders. So I've identified those and put them in the context of Paul's early letters, where he's working with churches, helping them to become strong in the gospel. And there were four letters written to those churches that had these one another statements that George has pulled out. Galatians, helping them avoid distorting the gospel, which eats away at their community life. Thessalonians, helping them become solidly converted to the gospel. Corinthians, helping them avoid fragmenting the gospel, which divides the community. And then in Romans, Paul's full treatise of the gospel, that the gospel itself implies that worshiping Jesus means living as a family, a true community. So that's Paul's early letters. Then Paul's middle letters there, which are meant to help churches become strong in the mission and vision of Christ's church. You have Ephesians. Christ's plan is for his church to reveal his wisdom by how they live out their calling together. Philippians, your churches should be one-mindedly participating in the global progress of the gospel. And then Colossians, implementing Jesus' new global family paradigm means living life together as an extended family. So that's the Pauline piece, the central piece here. Then you've got on the left Peter's role in network development. The four writings there that are connected to Peter's network that had these one another statements that Carl George pulled out were First Peter, which is about committing to building a complex state of mind so that you can stand firm together in any circumstance. James, which is talking about developing community wisdom or skillful living by engaging in prayerful reflection while holding on tightly to the apostles' teaching. Hebrews, which is instructing them to anchor themselves firmly to the apostles' teaching to avoid drifting back to old traditions. And then Mark, which Mark and Matthew are both part of the writings around Peter's network, that Jesus has inaugurated a whole new family and made you part of it, so you need to engage fully in that new community. So that's the Peter's piece there and what Peter was doing and how the one another's fit into that. And then you have John's writings and his role in his network development with this small regional church network in Asia. And so you have John's gospel that John builds off of with his other writings, that John's gospel is Jesus building one unified global family who together fully embrace and live out the abundant life. And that Jesus' new commandment then is to love one another. And what does that mean? What does it look like to love one another? And then in First John, you've got that you are all part of Jesus' new covenant community. And that has a reflection on one anothering as well. And then in Second John, that Jesus' body of truth lives within the church communities. So now you've got kind of John's context for what he's doing and how the writings fit into what John is trying to accomplish. So all these fit together. Now I've written the individual statements in such a way that they are almost an assessment piece that you can use to kind of assess your situation. They're all written as questions to help you think about your own church context. And are you doing these things well within the context of what they were intended to accomplish for strengthening churches? So I hope this is helpful for you. I figured I'd put this little video up there so that you all can have a clearer sense of that context. And I'm happy to interact with anyone that is unclear or has questions or even wants to have some dialogue and debate about these things. I'd be glad to do that. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.